Chapter 19. Devin, Gavin, and I arrived early. Devin wanted to make sure that all the last-minute stuff was done before the party started, and rather than pull Mickey away from his own plans, I opted to go with him. Where else would I be safer than surrounded by most of the Enforcer team? Everything that could be done ahead of time had been. There were several rows of hay bales set up for seating in front of one wall of the barn. The wall had a fresh coat of white paint, and as I looked around, I discovered they'd set up a projector and sound system. A couple 100 feet away was the large, shallow pit that they'd been digging the last time I'd been here. Now it was piled high with whatever wood could be scavenged. I could see old, rotting railroad ties, several pieces of broken furniture, and most of the brush they'd cleared away from the area at first look. I knew buried somewhere in the middle of it all was what was left of Jessup's body. It had been soaking in kerosene for the last couple of weeks, which, combined with the long, hot fire we were going to have tonight, should leave nothing behind. If anything was left, well, hopefully it would be lost in the beef bones that would be tossed into the flames, along with the plates and napkins they'd been served with. I had to hand it to Devin. He'd come up with a clever way to get rid of the remains. I don't know where he'd gotten the idea. I hadn't asked, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I wandered around, taking in all that had been done until I got bored, then made my way to the hay barn. There, I climbed up the pile of stacked bales until I found a comfortable spot about halfway up the pile, sat down, pulled out my PCD and started playing games. It might not have been how I would have chosen to spend the afternoon, but I could make it work. The pile of hay sheltered me from the frigid breeze, and I was out of Devin's way while he directed the men and got the last-minute preparations taken care of, but at the same time, I was close and protected. After a little while, I lost interest in the game, so I pulled up the book I was in the middle of. I lay back and got lost in the world unfolding in my mind. I didn't know how much time had passed when suddenly Devin's voice echoed through my mind. "Nickie, where are you?" He sounded worried. "I'm in the hay barn, why?" I pushed myself upright and found that my muscles had gone stiff from sitting unmoving in the cold so long. Every movement ached a little. I stretched a moment, then started down the pile. "We've been hunting for you for 20 minutes. Haven't you heard us calling?" "Sorry, I was reading and didn't hear anything." Reaching the ground, I headed for the main barn. It was only about 100 yards away, on the opposite side of the barn from where the fire would be. Devin met me halfway. "That must be one hell of a book." He wrapped one arm around my waist, pulled me close and kissed my cheek, then fell into step beside me as we made our way back to the main barn. "I'm sorry, I didn't intend to disappear. I thought Gavin saw me go out there." "He did, but when he went to look for you, he didn't see you. Where had you gone?" "I was there the whole time. I climbed up a ways to find somewhere comfortable to lay." Devin chuckled. "Only you. Why were you looking for me?" "No one had seen you in hours, I got worried. For all we knew, someone had tranked and kidnapped you again." I dropped my head to his shoulder. "I'm sorry you worried, but I'm fine." "Good to hear." We came to a stop near the rows of hay bales beside the barn. "I love you." He brushed his lips against mine. "I love you too." I used the mental connection instead of saying it aloud because I opened my mouth against his and drew him into a deep, searching kiss. We stood like that for several minutes, our arms around each other, just kissing and enjoying being close to each other. "Hey, you two, give the rest of us a break. We don't have anyone to hang on and keep us warm. You're making us all jealous." Gavin's voice broke the calm surrounding us. "Speak for yourself, Waters." Raphael called. "My girl will be here in a couple hours, then I'll be plenty warm." I laughed and looked at Devin, my face heating. "I kinda lost track of where we were, sorry." "Don't apologize. I loved every moment." He gave me a swift hug, then loosened his grip. "When will this thing get going?" "Kickoff is at 4, so I expect people to start showing up at about 3 or 3:30. I pulled my PCD from my pocket and checked the time. 2:48 p.m. Well, I guess I should get ready then. I looked down the dirt road leading to the house but saw nothing. What do you need to get ready? He frowned. I need to steal another kiss. I leaned close. Because once this thing gets going, I won't get a chance for a while. He leaned in and gave me a soft, lingering kiss. Don't wander off on your own tonight, all right? He met my gaze. I'm not going to ask you to stay with one or more of the guys at all times, but they'll all be watching out for you. Just keep one of them in sight and don't wander off with anyone. Please? He added that last as a request, maybe hoping I wouldn't blow up over it. I have no intention to go anywhere. With as many people as it looks like you're expecting, that would be stupid. Stupid is something you're not. He kissed the tip of my nose and looked back at the barn. Just be careful tonight for me. For you. I took his hand in mine and squeezed for a second before releasing him. You go check on whatever it is you're itching to check. I grinned. Don't give me that look, I can tell something just occurred to you to double check. I'm gonna go make sure I don't have hay in my hair. It wouldn't do to look like I've been rolling in the hay before the party even starts. Devin stepped back and looked me up and down once. I like you with the tousled, rolling in the hay look. He gave me a mischievous grin. I might have to see what the real thing looks like later. I might let you. Later. I pushed him away. Now go. I watched as he went toward the house where there was a huge grill waiting to be lit. It would need to be lit soon so the wood could burn down to coals for cooking. I went back to the truck to dig my brush out of my purse. After pulling all the straw I could find out of my hair and using my fingers to brush it back into place, I went in search of Devin. I found him fiddling with the projector and sound system, trying to make it work to suit him. Hey babe, what's up? He asked as I approached. What is there to drink? What do you mean? Sodas, cocoa, beer, whatever. I'm thirsty. Oh, over near the grill is a row of ice chests full of all kinds of stuff. Great. I waved my fingers at him and headed that way. He wasn't kidding when he'd said there was a row of ice chests. There were probably 20 of them lined up. They were front to back, so a person could easily work their way down the line and find what they were after. I opened several and found that each held a different drink, except for the first 3 that were filled with water. The next one had milk. I assumed that was for the kids, then several kinds of soda, finally different varieties of beer. I pulled my favorite, a semi-local microbrewery red beer, and went back to Devin. I had to look a minute as he'd finished with the sound system, but I soon found him next to the bonfire. They were getting ready to light it. Hey, I stepped up beside him and wrapped my free arm around his waist. Can I make a suggestion? Sure, what makes you think I wouldn't welcome your input? 'Cause you wouldn't let me help put this together. It wasn't that I didn't want your input. He turned and wrapped his arms around me. I just didn't want you worrying about it. I shrugged. No problem. What's your suggestion? Label the ice chests. He frowned, not understanding. Each ice chest has something different in it. I had to open them all to find this. I lifted my beer bottle. It would be a lot easier on everyone, not to mention keep things colder if you could tell as you walked by what was in each one. You're right. He turned and yelled at Mickey, and when the man got close enough to hear, he told him to take a roll of duct tape and marker and label all the chests with what was inside. As the enforcer headed off to complete the job, Devin turned back to me. Better? Immensely. I made a big show of kissing him on the cheek before tipping back my beer. The familiar pop and ping of a vehicle on gravel alerted us to someone's arrival. I stepped back several feet until I was close to the circle of hay bales that were surrounding the fire. They weren't close, at least 15 feet away from the mountain of wood, so no stray sparks would accidentally light one. I watched as Devin pulled a book of matches from his pocket, lit one, and tossed it into the pile. Nothing happened at first as the match slowly burned and fell through the debris, but then it reached the ground and a piece of wood that had been doused with lighter fluid. The flame caught and spread. It raced along the line of accelerator until the flames were all the way around the huge pile. "What did you do? Walk around the whole thing with your starter fluid?" I asked. "Of course. I don't want it to burn everything on one side and leave half of it to collapse later." Devin grinned back. "Pyro." I watched as the flame spread inward and upward until the whole mountain was a ball of fire and tendrils of fire licked the sky. "What if it spreads?" "Ethan has hoses stretched out here and over toward the grill just in case." "Good to know." While I'd been watching the fire, the truck we'd heard on the road pulled in and parked next to ours, another right behind it. The first was Bill's SUV, the second was Terry's old pickup. I watched as Bill, Karen, and Terry climbed out and looked around. "Go ahead, show them around," Devin said, behind me. "I'm gonna keep an eye on this for a few minutes, then I'll let someone else take over." "Okay." I started toward the pack leaders and met them as they headed toward the improvised big screen that was the barn. "Hey guys, how has your day been?" I threw my arms around Karen, then Bill, nodding at Terry in greeting. "Nothing to complain about." "You?" Karen asked with a smile. "Not bad, we've been here most of the day." I motioned around me with one hand, holding my beer at my waist with the other. Bill and Karen both looked around a moment. "It looks good, where can I get me one of those?" Bill asked. "Over here." I led them to the row of ice chests, noticing that they all now wore strips of silver tape on the end with big block letters telling the contents. "There's almost anything you want, so if red's not your thing, you can pick your poison." "You've really done a lot of work here, dear," Karen said as Bill headed for the drinks. "I had nothing to do with it," I said with a laugh. I offered, but Devin wouldn't hear of it, said he had it all under control. Then he did a wonderful job of it. I looked over toward the bonfire where I'd left my mate, but I couldn't see him. A moment later, he appeared around the barn heading our way. "I see you've found the important stuff," Devin addressed the pack leaders as he wrapped one arm around me and pulled me against him. His other hand came up to snag the bottle out of my hand. It was a casual movement, as if he did it all the time. He tipped the bottle back, draining the last few swallows, then grinned at me as I stared at him, wondering what he was up to. "I've got to light the wood in the grills, but would you get me one when you get yours?" "I'll take care of this." He lifted the empty bottle. "Why not?" I rolled my eyes. "Same thing, or you want something else?" "Same thing's good." He wadded paper and shoved it under the wood in the bottom of the grill in several places before reaching underneath and using the vent holes in the bottom to light the paper. "No lighter fluid with this one?" I grinned as I handed him his beer. "Nope, not on a fire we're gonna cook on." He twisted the top off his bottle and handed it back to me, taking the unopened one from my hand. "I can taste it even after the wood's burned to coal." "You know," I looked down at the open bottle, then back up at him. "I can open a bottle." "I know you can, but you brought me one, so the least I could do was open yours." I smiled and shook my head. Sometimes I had no clue what was going through his mind. Slowly at first, then faster, people started to arrive, and before long the parking area the men had cleared on the far side of the ranch house was full, and people started parking anywhere they could find. The game was in full swing, and there was a large crowd of men and teenagers, with a few women mixed in, sitting in front of the game. I couldn't tell which team had more supporters. It seemed pretty equally split. Hell, I couldn't even tell you which teams were playing. Devin had a couple enforcers manning the grills, with rotating shifts so no one got too hot. I planned to wait a while before joining the food line. I wasn't starving, and there was no reason not to let some of the guests eat first. I sat on a bale of hay at the back of the arrangement for the game. I wasn't even watching, but it was an out-of-the-way place to sit and watch the crowd. Several people had stopped and talked to me. They would sit for a while, then move on. My attention was on the screen and I was watching the commercials, the only part of the game that held any draw for me, when someone sat down beside me. "Hey, how's your evening?" My brother's voice was happy and relaxed. I turned and looked at Rain. Rissa was on his other side, and he wore a grin. "No complaints. I didn't realize you would be here." Rissa invited me. He nodded his head toward her, then gave her a light kiss on the cheek. Since I'm lucky enough to be off duty tonight, I didn't have any reason to say no. "I'm glad you came. You having a good time?" He looked around, scanning the area. "Yeah. It's a good party." I felt the bale I was sitting on move as someone sat on my other side. Turning, I found Devin. He held 2 plates piled high with ribs, homemade mac and cheese, a mound of coleslaw, and a couple of cornbread muffins. "You didn't have to serve me. I was gonna get in line in a little bit, once the line got a little shorter." I took my plate, as well as the plastic fork and small pile of napkins he was holding underneath it. "Rank has its privileges, baby. Might as well get used to it." He gave me a peck on the cheek and started eating. "You gotten any of this yet?" I turned back to Rain and Rissa. "Not yet, we just got here." "We'll get in line in a few," Rain said. "You two go ahead and eat, we're gonna mingle a little before we worry about food." "Okay, it's good to see you." I waved with my fork. "This is really good," I said to Devin in between bites. "It's not bad, but your mac and cheese is better." "Where did all this food come from?" I looked around. There was at least 500 people there, and more arriving all the time. I couldn't imagine how much food it would take to feed this many, or how long it would take to prepare it all. Different places. Some of it we ordered, but most of it we had people in the pack cook. Gavin did some of it, and we had a group of women, mostly those whose kids are grown like my mom, volunteer to make whatever we needed. Still, it had to be a lot of work. Devin shrugged. I wasn't sure if that meant he didn't know how much work it had been, or if it didn't matter. When we were finished eating, I took his plate while he went to check on something, and tossed it and mine along with the bones into the blazing bonfire. I stood and watched while the paper plates were devoured by the flame. After staring at the fire for several minutes, I lost interest and turned to head back toward the game. At least there I could see the commercials. After the game ended, Devin and I went to sit near the fire together. I sat on one of the bales ringing the blaze, while he sat on the ground between my knees. I pulled the ponytail holder from his hair and ran my fingers through it. He was so used to me doing this, he didn't bother to complain. "Having fun?" he asked, his eyes still on the flames. "Yeah." I continued to comb through his hair. I've met a lot of people, and visited with some I already knew. Bill and Karen had already left. They hadn't stayed long but had made an appearance. Hank and Alexis had stayed a little longer, but they hadn't hung around very long either. I was surprised by how many people had shown up. I had no idea there were this many Kitsune in the valley, and I said as much to Devin. "They don't all live in the valley," he said. "I thought you said it's a pack event?" "I did, but Bill's got a pretty big territory." "What do you mean?" "Superior, Sholau, Alpine, Glenwood, Lordsburg, Bowie and Wilcox are all part of the pack." "Wow. That's a lot of real estate." "It is." Instead of putting the ponytail back in his hair, I quickly pulled it into a braid. "There." I dropped my hands on his shoulders and watched the flame for a while. "Hey you two, what's up?" came a familiar voice. I twisted around and saw Bailey, but I was surprised to see she wasn't alone. Bo was on her other side, the fingers of one hand woven with hers. "Hey B, we're good, what are you up to?" "Just mingling." She shrugged. "I see you've met our visitors." I nodded in Bo's direction, and Devin twisted around to see who I was referring to. Yeah, she paused. I'm gonna need to stop by when you're not busy sometime. We need to catch up. It hadn't been all that long since we'd last caught up, less than 2 weeks, but between being kidnapped and the heightened security it had caused, I hadn't been able to do more than call her now and then. I knew firsthand that when circumstances were right, things could move incredibly fast. I'll leave word to let you in, Bailey, Devin said, still seated between my knees. That kind of surprised me. I'd figured she was too new to the pack for that. I wondered what was up. Great, thanks, she said. Stop by the shop on Monday, we'll have plenty of time to catch up. I suggested. Great. I looked past her to Bo. Did our Aniquitos get a hold of you? About tomorrow? He did. He nodded. Good, I just wanted to be sure. How were you enjoying your visit? No complaints. It's been a nice vacation. I'm glad you're enjoying your stay. It's a nice town you've got here, he said. Spending a little time here hasn't been a hardship. His eyes flicked to Bailey and a small smile formed on his lips. We talked for a couple more minutes, and they said their goodbyes before continuing off toward where the desserts had been laid out. So what gives? I sent to Devin along our mental channel. What do you mean? I thought Bailey would be too new to the pack for you to let her through the tightened security you've got on me right now. I did the background check on her, she came back clean. Background check? He dropped his head to one side, till it rested on my thigh. When someone wants to switch packs, the pack they want to go to often does some kind of investigation into their background. How they do it varies by the pack and who is doing them, but when I became Theron, those checks became my job. I'm thorough. I didn't know what to say to that. I knew he had more to do for the pack than just manage the enforcer team, but I'd been so out of touch for the last 2 months that I had no idea what he'd been doing. You have to do that often? Ethan says he averaged a couple a year. So you're halfway through for the year. He shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. If I'd known the foxes were coming, I'd have done at least a cursory check on them. I'm not happy with not knowing anything about them. There's too much risk to letting shifters we don't know run free through our territory. He had a point, but with the sheer amount of country that Bill was in charge of, policing it all was a big job. How are you managing to keep on top of the whole territory and work on the farm too? Devin shrugged. It's got to get done, so I just do it. And take care of me too. I wrapped my arms loosely round his neck and kissed the top of his head. He tilted his head back until his lips met mine and returned the affectionate kiss. That's what mates do, baby. I lifted one hand to cup his cheek as we continued to share the upside-down kiss. I don't know how you've managed it. It's been all I can do to go to work each day, but I'm getting past it. I'm gonna do my best to help you, instead of being something else you have to take care of. I never thought of you that way. I know you didn't. That's part of why I love you. We sat in front of the fire, visiting with people who stopped by, until the crowd was almost entirely gone. Sir. Mickey's voice came from behind me. Yes, Mouse? Devin asked, without lifting his head from where it rested against my belly. Everyone's either out running or left for the night. What do you want us to do? Mickey asked. How many are out running? Devin wanted to know. I'd say maybe 15 or 20, Mickey said after a moment. There's only about 10 cars left that don't belong to the team. I knew he meant the enforcers. Devin was quiet for a moment. What's everyone else want to do? Well, we've got a couple of guys who have to work tomorrow, and a couple more who would like to go home for the night. And the others? Open to whatever you want, sir. I'd like a couple to stay here overnight. Ask for volunteers first. If no one does, come check with me again. The rest can go home. But anyone not on duty or working a civilian job needs to be back here by 8 tomorrow morning. Got it, sir. What did I tell you about calling me sir? Not to, sir. Nickie chuckled as he turned and headed back toward the gathered enforcers. I could see their outlines about 50 feet away, but it was too dark to make out more. What are we gonna do now that everyone's gone? I drew small circles along the side of his neck with one hand. They're not all gone, not yet, he said, his voice soft. But I thought maybe we'd shift and go for a run. After that, it's up to you. But we have to be back here at 8 tomorrow. I do, there's no reason you have to be here. I fell silent. I was supposed to shift Besson, but that wasn't until tomorrow afternoon. Still, there was no reason for me to be here so early. I didn't know what I wanted. Shifting sounds good, but not here. I waited as he pushed himself to his feet, then took the hand he offered and let him pull me to my feet. Come on. I've got a place we can shift. He led me toward the group of enforcers. Several were breaking away from the main cluster, each heading for their own vehicle. We stopped once we reached the group still gathered. We have enough volunteers to stay here tonight, or do I need to make assignments? Devin asked, not addressing any one man in particular. We're good, Nickie said. I'll stay, Ethan said. I'm in, Raphael put in. Me too, Mike Harrowitz said. I smiled, nodding in greeting. All right then, Devin turned to Gavin. I'm not sure yet where we'll be in the morning, but if you don't hear from me before then, come here instead of the house in the morning. You got it, Gavin said, then turned toward the vehicles, apparently headed home for the night. Nothing else you need me for? Devin's gaze moved from Mike to Ethan to Raphael. When no one spoke up, he continued, All right, keep an eye on the fire until it burns out. We're gonna go for a run. If you need me, call out. Devin's arm around my waist steered me as he moved past the men. We went past the building that had been used as a projection screen and toward the open-sided hay barn where I'd been reading earlier. As we rounded the wall of baled hay, I saw something had changed since I'd been there a few hours earlier. In the dim moonlight, I could see a pile of loose hay, almost as if someone had broken apart several bales and piled it together. What's this? I asked. I thought we might stay here tonight. My mate motioned to a pair of rolled sleeping bags sitting on a nearby bale. If you want. If not, no big deal, we can go home after our run. I made a 360-degree turn, looking all around. There was nothing to be seen from our spot but desert. The occasional flicker of light from the fire was the only sign of anyone else around. It felt like we were isolated in the desert, but at the same time, sheltered and secure by the stacked hay that stood on two sides. Staying here sounds good, but let's lay the sleeping bags out before we change. I don't want to freeze doing it later. Together, we unrolled the sleeping bags, zipped them together to make a double-sized one, and laid it out over the mound of loose hay, spreading the pile so it made a thick, even layer to sleep on. Once done with that, we stripped out of our clothes. I didn't wait for Devin to be ready before I changed. It was too cold, and I was shivering before I was even through getting my own clothes off. I called forth my wolf form even as I started to bend down, and I felt my bones start to shift and move before my hands touched the ground. The sharp sting of my skin sprouting fur was a welcome change from the biting cold. Granted, winter in the desert was nothing compared to Arctic conditions, but 20 or 30 is a big change from the 100 days we dealt with in the summer, and to me, it might as well be 30 below. The blur of the change cleared from my vision, and I stretched and shook before turning to look for Devin. His dark gray and black fur blended into the shadows, making him barely visible except for the light glinting off his amber eyes. Seeing he was ready, I headed out at a run, loving the feel of the wind ruffling my fur. I didn't go far. While I could see fine in moonlight, I wasn't sure I would be able to find my way back if I didn't keep the ranch in sight. I circled the lights, not sure how much land I'd covered, but I was pretty sure I'd made at least one full circle, sometimes running full out, sometimes trotting along with Devon beside me. I wasn't thinking about how far we'd gone, I just enjoyed the night air, the subtle difference in the scents and sounds than during the day. You about ready to head back? Devon's voice whispered through my mind. Anytime you are, you getting tired? No, but the temperature is dropping quick, and the thought of curling up against you has a certain attraction. I turned toward the ranch house and the makeshift bed that awaited us. You're right, it does. Back in the hay barn, I called my human form, and once my shift was complete, quickly climbed into the waiting sleeping bag. I huddled deep and shivered for a moment, until Devon slid in beside me. Then I clung to him, trying to absorb as much of his warmth as I could. The sudden lack of fur always left me chilled, but it was magnified in the cold night air. It only took a few minutes until I warmed up, and my shivering subsided. I didn't move away, instead I started trailing light fingertips along Devon's chest, teasing him with a gentle touch. You planning on doing anything else, or you planning to drive me crazy with that? His voice barely above a whisper. He had one arm under my head and wrapped around my back, the other folded under his head. His fingers drew light designs along my back in a manner similar to what I was doing to him. I don't know, I smiled against his shoulder. Maybe I just like touching you. I have no doubt about that, little warrior, the feeling is mutual. I let my trailing fingertips dip below his waist and along the side of his hip. He sucked in a sharp breath without my having touched anything more sensitive. I was deliberately avoiding certain parts of him. Without another word, I trailed my hand down his leg and lowered my mouth to one nipple. His entire body jerked, and the arm wrapped around my back tightened. Strong fingers dug into my ass. Heat rushed through my body. I loved the way he reacted to me. I trailed my hand back up the side of his body, while at the same time swirling my tongue around the tiny button in my mouth. When my hand reached the other side of his chest, I let my fingers play over the other nipple there, teasing, mimicking the motions of my mouth as much as possible. Devon let a low groan escape and his back arched. As he fell back against the bedding, his arm snaked across his stomach. He cupped my breast, squeezing and kneading for a moment before pulling and tugging at the nipple. I sucked harder at the bit of skin in my mouth while my body tried to get closer to his. My senses inflamed, the soft touch of my fingers became the light scrape of nails against his skin. The hand left my breast and trailed up my neck until his finger under my chin urged my head up. As I lifted my head to look at him, Devon met my lips with his and pressed an urgent kiss against them. Without thinking about it, I opened the connection between our minds wider. The ache of his desire rushed through me, and a lightning bolt of need shot through my body. My hand on his chest searched for and found his upper arm, and I held on tight as I lost the ability to think. I don't know how long we stayed that way, existing only in each other, in the feel of lips and tongues sliding against each other. The next thing I was aware of was Devon's hands on my hips as he lifted me to lay on top of him. My legs naturally fell to either side of his hips, and his thick erection was pressed into my belly. I opened my mouth to ask why he'd moved me, but his mouth once more covered mine. I wanted to be able to touch you. His words appeared in my mind. I couldn't reach enough the other way. I knew the feeling. The arm that had been trapped beneath me moved up his side, my fingernails scraping lightly along his skin until just below his arm. Bracing myself against the ground, I pushed myself up his body, so I didn't have to stretch so far to kiss him. His hands skimmed along my sides until they moved around and gripped my butt. Pulling me a little farther up, he ground his hips into mine as he drew me deeper into the kiss. Without warning, the world tilted, and then I was laying on my back staring up at Devon as he hovered over me in the near darkness. I blinked once, then grinned. Wanted to be in charge, huh? Something like that. He lowered his mouth to mine once more, but it didn't last long. He broke away and trailed kisses and small sharp nips down the side of my neck. I let my head fall back and my hands come to rest on his shoulders as he worked his way down my body, caressing, kissing, and biting. I tried to lay still and let him work his magic, but I had a hard time controlling myself. My fingers curled into his back and my hips arched and thrust against him. Not wanting to draw blood, I moved my hands to either side of me, where I could fist them in the blanket beneath me. His tongue dipped into my navel and I whimpered. It didn't really matter what came next. I knew he wouldn't leave me hanging, at least not for long. His mouth moved lower and he pushed my knees apart as he went. I closed my eyes and surrendered all idea of having any control tonight. I reveled in the soft, sweeping strokes of his hands moving along my skin, down over my thighs and back up the inside. He avoided the most sensitive part of me until I let all tension drain from my body. A long stroke of Devon's tongue up my slit surprised me, drew a groan from deep in my throat. My hands tangled in his hair as his tongue made light teasing strokes all around my clit, never actually touching it. I started to close my legs on his head, but he held them open with his hands, sliding them up until he could use his thumbs to spread my labia. He held me open to his attention. A whimper escaped me. I felt cream leaking from my core and dripping down my skin. I wanted more, needed more, but the words wouldn't form. A cold breeze moved across my skin, making me gasp and shiver. Devon lifted his head, then moved up my body, stopping to kiss and toy with my breasts for a moment before continuing. I shuddered as his body covered mine, the anticipation making me unable to resist the urge. He captured my mouth with his, one hand cupping my jaw as he lined his erection up with my opening and slowly pushed inside. My arms came up and went around him, my fingers digging into his back. His tongue teased mine, and I was only vaguely aware of lifting my knees, bracing my feet against the ground so I could push my hips against him. I felt myself stretch around him as his hips hit mine. My hips tilted and he sank ever so slightly deeper. I groaned. My world narrowed to the sensation of his body moving inside mine and the feelings pouring through our connection. It was more than I knew how to process. Without warning, my body tensed and my womb clenched. Pleasure flooded my brain, and I was only vaguely aware of my fingers digging into Devon's skin as my back arched and a cry was forced from my lips. Devon. He never slowed, instead pushing through my tightened channel. Slowly, the wave of pleasure receded, only to be replaced by another. I lost track of my feelings and those coming through our wide-open mental connection. The sensations overwhelmed me and I screamed my pleasure. Devon silenced me by covering my mouth with his own, swallowing my cry as he fed me his. He lay still for several seconds, the weight of his body over mine was cozy. After a moment, he moved to one side and lay on his back. I turned toward him and curled against his side, my head pillowed on his shoulder as I fell asleep.